Thank you, Nancy. Good afternoon, everybody. To tell you the truth, after Chip's talk, I don't know what else needs to be said. Just as soon pass the mic on to Nelson and we move on. But I do want to say a few things. I'm really happy to be here. And I mean, the three panels so far, I mean, there's a lot of powerful ideas here in this room and here in Fayetteville. And hopefully they will bear some fruit as we move through the next few months and years here in the city and in our state and in the nation. I want to try to frame my brief remarks in terms of wealth disparities, the state, and the foreclosure crisis. I'm just going to touch a little bit on all of that. And to start with a disclaimer, much of what I will say today may not reflect the views of the North Carolina Justice Center. I just want to be clear on that, although I work there along with my colleague Beth. And then the other thing, I do want to tell you that on the first day of early voting, I was number 28 in line and I voted for Obama. But I may say some things that you will wonder about in terms of Obama. But so I just want to lay that out, okay, as part of what we're dealing with. And I think, as Chip pointed out, this is quite a juncture. I mean, I think what we're seeing, there may be some turns in this country where it is we can get a sufficient number of white voters to vote for him so that he would become the nominee in the primary, and a sufficient number perhaps on November 4th to vote him into the presidency, right? But it does not mean that all of the problems that we've talked about in this panel heretofore, particularly the question of white privilege and the structural racism that exists, right, are not going to disappear on November the 5th. And we just really need to be clear on that. All of the excitement that people have been demonstrating, from my grandchildren on to my father who's 89, this is beautiful, this is wonderful, but we have to be sober and clear and what we need to do on the other side of this victory that we actually hope to see. I want to talk a little bit about wealth. Nancy asked me to talk about this and this whole idea, the color of wealth and the wealth divide. And the kind of framing I had, it's a wonderful book called The Color of Wealth, published by folks who work at United for a Fair Economy. It's the story behind the U.S. racial divide. It's not the first piece to really tackle this question of race and wealth. A number of people have done it. It's published in 2006. But for me, it really has gathered the data and the analysis based on U.S. history and what's happening to people of color and really taking a look at it. And in terms of wealth, my own background and orientation, and I think many of you in the social justice movement, is to typically look at wages rather than wealth. Okay, how much do we make? What is our annual salary? What is our hourly wage? What do we get from the jobs that we perform? And we fight on that basis alone. And so fighting against discrimination, fighting for affirmative action, all of those things has been on the basis of what we can earn on income, right? This analysis takes this idea of wealth as being another framework to look at. And to demonstrate, right, how it is that we've got these disparities that you can see from the 1850s all the way up until now. And I think it's a fairly healthy analysis. Basically, it is wealth is your assets minus what you owe. And so we're talking about money in the bank, savings. We're talking about home ownership, which is key to what I want to say here today. And it's talking about other assets that you may have, whether it's boats or jewelry or something, mainly the stuff that we don't have in the black community, but certainly part of what you understand to be wealth and assets. And so if we look at it that way, we get a real accurate picture of the possibilities for black people and other people of color to advance. Because if we limit our analysis to just wages, right, you're at the mercy of the discrimination that we've talked about all along the line. That your wages, right, are subject to whether or not you'll be hired. Your wages are subject to whether you'll be laid off first. Your wages are subject to whether or not your plant will close and move to another country. All of those kinds of things are there, wherein wealth is something that you can pass on from generation to generation, and that's what has not happened in terms of African Americans and other people of color. So it's an important thing to look at. So many of you know the program that comes on National Public Radio, the Marketplace, first the numbers, okay, is what they say. So just to give us a little bit of an idea in terms of wealth in this country, the median net worth in 2001 for white people was $120,000, $120,900, right? For people of color, $17,100, right? The mean net worth, okay, and we know the difference between the median and the mean, that the mean is the average amongst our communities, right? For white folks, is $482,534, and for African Americans, $75,748. And for Latino families, $89,175. So we've got this huge disparity in wealth. And much of it has to do with this question of home ownership. And I want to raise that. When we look at, in 2003, at the various communities that we're talking about, 75% of white folks in this country own their homes, and only 48% of African Americans own their homes. Okay? In the Latino community, slightly behind African Americans, 46.7%. Asian and Pacific Islanders, 56.3%. And finally, Native Americans, 54.3%. So you see the kind of disparities that we have there in home ownership. This thing that allows us to pass wealth on from generation to generation is absent, is very difficult. And it makes us think back to the question, some of the earlier period that Chip talked about. Many of us who make the argument for reparations, right? We start from the point of view that home ownership or land ownership, right, was not made available to the African American community. So the ability to pass this wealth along from generation to generation was not there. And it's something we need to think about in this coming period. How does this happen, though? Was it just like, evil white folks, which is an analysis that many people have held on to for far too long? Is it an economic system? And in fact, is it an economic system that has government support to it? And what I want to argument that at key times in the history of this country, there has been government intervention that has contributed to this, so that the privilege that white communities have, right, have been assisted and abetted by government intervention, and the same kind of intervention in the negative side towards communities of color, African Americans, Native Americans, and Latinos. So I just raised a couple of them here for us to think about it, because it's really important in this context today of regulation, deregulation, government intervention, leave it alone, let the markets work itself out, right? Selectively, we find intervention in the history of this country, and we need to think about that as we evaluate the response to the crisis. So let's just take a couple. For white folks, the gold rush, the land claims of 1849, right? Claims on somebody else's land, by the way, right? Slavery, right? The fact that it was codified, right? There were laws, the government supported slavery, and the accumulation of capital and wealth, right, in favor of white folks who were slave owners, who were landowners. The Homestead Act of 1862, right? You could go get you some land, right? Again, somebody else's land, but it was an advantage so that you could accumulate this wealth over time. In terms of Native Americans, right, all of the wars against the tribes from the very beginning, the genocide that was talked about in the first passage, right, you take any of the nations across the country from east to west, and you see that appropriation in those wars, okay? The Sioux, and this is something I didn't know, but something raised in this wonderful book, that the state of Iowa, and maybe some people know that, right, was ceded to the U.S. In 1851, right? All of the claims that the Sioux Nation had were given up to the U.S. So these Iowa farmers, these regular farmers, and even agribusiness there now, right, is built up on the backs of the Native people who had to give that land up. bounties for Native Americans in California, $1 million in 1851 for Native scalps. Right? This is a part of that history.